Previously on the Alpha J Show.
What episodes are those gonna be?
Oh no. Number 5. A pal for Gary. So here we have a pal for Gary. This episode is one of the first episodes that I've heard people bashing when I found out about this whole animation reviewing community. Upon view, one can notice quite a bit of why this episode doesn't work and why people hate it so much. For one thing, SpongeBob's ignorance to the entire thing is very annoying. The way SpongeBob cares for Gary and wants his opinion while at the Krusty Krab, then feels totally guilt-free when he gets Gary a pet that neither has been confirmed to communicate with, is annoying. Not to mention that this entire episode was made because of a coincidence. The leash being used as a lasso and that being the basis of this entire Gary torture episode. It also doesn't help that Mr. Krabs was outside his office when he's usually in his office. The episode also has a lot of filler, which, like I said before, seems like a fix in bad SpongeBob episodes. I wonder why an episode with such a generic premise seems to mess it up this bad and still have time to meander around the plot. Also, what is this about business trips? If you're leaving your son alone with those things, I really hope that he doesn't have any other pets, or did we just witness a future murder? Also, like in these torture episodes, SpongeBob conveniently can't communicate with Gary. He also does awfully rude things like stop Gary from eating when the other pet didn't even attempt to get to his food bowl, even putting them to bed together, not accepting his apology, and wait, not accept his apology.
Aw, look at you two, so cute together. I accept your apology, Gary.
Wait, so you can communicate with Gary? So if you can't communicate with him, how in the world did you miss all of this?
Gary! You put Fluffy down right now. Bad boy, Gary. Bad boy.
I guess it's time to rewrite this. For this to work, either Gary or the pet has to be the antagonist and SpongeBob has to be fully aware of what's happening. For review's sake, let's make the pet the antagonist. We can have the scene play up as it would, however, instead have it be Gary's toy or something clear cut so that we can see that Gary does want to play with SpongeBob. However, when Gary leaves, Gary understands that he has to go to work and doesn't stress about it. This is important. But the SpongeBob who closed the door and heads for work, not seeing Gary taking this completely fine, he assumes that Gary is miserable without him. So walking to work, he notices people with their pets, which makes sure that SpongeBob doesn't forget that he left Gary home by himself. Coming home from work, let SpongeBob get a normal pet, or at least if he's going to go to that weird pet lady, have the pet not react by turning into a gross monster, at least not on the outside. When the pet comes home with SpongeBob, we can have Gary still playing with the same toy, or at least going back to it after having a great day alone. This pet would at first get along with Gary. However, we will see later on that the pet has some flaws. The weekend will roll around and SpongeBob will have full time to play with both pets. However, the new pet will have different plans. For namesake, the new pet will be named Fluffy. Fluffy would also have a patch or an overlay somewhere on his shell. Anytime SpongeBob would play with Gary, Fluffy would get jealous. However, he would take that opportunity to do tricks. SpongeBob would get excited and turn over to Fluffy, paying full attention to him. Throughout the day, SpongeBob would get in between a war with which pet is more exciting. However, Fluffy would get the advantage and win each time. Whether the trick is something as elaborate as hula hooping while balancing something on his nose and so much more, or as simple as rolling over, Fluffy would always outmatch Gary in the end. At this point, Gary would get depressed until around nighttime. All three of them would go to sleep. However, just as an added kick to the nards, Fluffy would be sleeping in SpongeBob's bed. During this time, Fluffy would get out of SpongeBob's bed and drag Gary out of the room. This is the part where you can have the pets fight. The pets can start upstairs and spill downstairs. This fight would be very creative, using everything from kitchenware to wrestling, anything to portray action. Gary would unfortunately lose, being thrown or flung against the library. As Fluffy would tower over Gary to give his last blow, SpongeBob would come in at the last second, hearing all this commotion and see Gary bruised. At this time, the patch or overlay would come off, showing Fluffy to be a pseudo name for something more thug-like, like Blade or Butch or Pinktastic. He would be a jailer snail, a convict. SpongeBob would remove him using karate or his net, effectively kicking him out of his home. He would then take care of Gary, spending the last part of his weekend with him and him only. You can then end on a joke with the jailer snail crawling into Patrick's house only to find Patrick more destructive than himself running off. Number 4. Pet Sitter Pat. Well, what do we have here? Oh, that's right, another Gary torture episode. However, the funny thing is that this is just taking the plot where Squidward was supposed to take care of Gary and didn't, and just giving it to Patrick. As you will see later, Patrick isn't the best candidate for lists like this. In fact, didn't Mr. Krabs use Gary for money? And Squidward would starve him to near death? And in this episode, Patrick abuses him in various ways. And then there's the other episode where SpongeBob leaves Gary with a pet he knows nothing about that nearly ends up killing him. Poor Snail. The problem with this episode is that Gary acts too much like a pet in this episode, when in many other episodes, like the one from before, he acts like a child. To prove this, mind you that Gary talked to SpongeBob. I'm still not over that. And he uses a lot of advanced things that a pet may not do in self-defense. Here, Gary gets turned back to a quote normal pet, and even tries to attack Patrick as one. SpongeBob again is very concerned over his pet, but yet again he's so concerned about his pet that he won't even listen to him, which is very sad. But if you thought I wasn't going to talk about Patrick, let me state for a fact that Patrick is a shell of his character. From eating Gary's food, force washing Gary, destroying the house, and yet again, like last time, SpongeBob sees none of it and thinks nothing was done wrong. The joke is that Patrick is clearly not the best person to take care of Gary. But when you look back and you view this episode under, let's say, creepy music, then this episode gets to a new level of cringe. Gary is in pure agony in some of these scenes. Not to mention that Patrick gives no attention to SpongeBob, the pet owner. I understand that they were trying to fix the episode, but the problem is that Gary should have been more like a child for this to work. He obviously fears Patrick, which, if you take episodes like Dumped, this was clearly never originally the case. Also in this episode, they showed a clam in the background. I guess SpongeBob doesn't want the clam to be fed, bathed, or cared for. There's so much wrong with this episode. So let me just rewrite it. I'm going to rewrite this episode with Gary acting like a child to serve my case. Have the episode play out like it would. This time, however, Gary's mentality would be that he can feed, bathe, and generally take care of himself. So when Gary is given to Patrick to take care of, let the joke be that Patrick is the one to be taken care of, and Gary is the true babysitter. To some, this plot may further the notion that Patrick is dumb. However, with the right jokes, I believe in this case, that notion can be hand-waved. So as SpongeBob leaves, Gary and Patrick will be alone. Here are some of the scenes I think that can work for this. For feeding, let's have Patrick bend down to grab the bag, ripping a hole in it to pour and feed to Gary. Let us also have the pet bowl next to the shell phone. So as Patrick is getting ready to pour the pet food into the bowl, he gets a call on the shell phone. You can even have it be one of those pesky telemarketers. However, when standing back up, the bag would be upside down, pouring into the bowl. Gary, seeing that the bowl would be overflowing, taps Patrick, and Patrick would disregard what he has to say, telling Gary that he is on the phone. During this time, he would turn the bag back over, pouring just slightly over the amount. Another scene can have something to do with Patrick and Gary playing with toys. This time Patrick would get wrapped up in one of the toys and not give Gary a chance to play with it. Gary would then walk away, upset with how stingy Patrick is being with this particular pet toy. In the process, he would walk over to a laser pointer, which would have Patrick act like a cat, not literally, and try to catch the laser. Gary would then use this to his advantage, not only getting the toy, but also having Patrick crash into the shelf with the pet treats on it. However, Patrick wouldn't be hurt. Lastly, since Gary may not want to take a bath, he runs from Patrick, but have Patrick not have a flamethrower in the process, please? Just have him run from room to room. If it can work for Scooby-Doo, then it can work for this, right? The twist here would be that Patrick trips over one of the toys that he forgot to put away and fall into something dirty, whether it be tripping into SpongeBob's food closet or something a bit more suggestive. Either way, you can have it happen off camera, and Patrick would end up taking the first bath himself. The reason why I believe this works is because Patrick ends up doing the wrong first. However, slowly, Gary begins to become the antagonist, taking advantage of Patrick and his slowness. So at the end, I was thinking something along the lines of the following. Gary would have trashed the house, and Patrick would see, making a big deal of letting the sponge down. Gary would have to see what he did was wrong and help Patrick clean up. During this process, he'd take a bath as well, which would lead to Patrick having a short rest, which in reality knocks him out. So when SpongeBob comes home, he gets the idea that all Patrick did was sleep, waking him up and telling him that he can go home. He'd be puzzled at the idea of Patrick sleeping all day but Gary being okay. He'd shrug it off and ask Gary how he was in an attempt at a joke, but the episode would end on deadpan comedy. Number 3. One course meal. The granddaddy of all infamous SpongeBob episodes, one course meal. While House Fancy has that one cringy scene, Are You Happy Now has that one disturbingly dark scene, Just One Bite had that realistically crude scene, take the cringe with the realistic and the disturbing and you got yourself one course meal. This is a meal that not even the bottomless glutton Patrick would even touch. Thank God Patrick has nothing to do with this episode. It is a shame how much effort they put into the beginning for it all to be wasted on a plot that makes Mr. Krabs look dark. No matter how much bright colors and funny jokes you give this, Krabs essentially gets Plankton to want to run himself over. Is it suicide? Heavily implied. Does that make this episode funny? Well, what do you think? Plankton's role is to steal the formula. It is the backbone of many episodes, including the SpongeBob original movie. They made so many episodes revolving this simple plot, and this time, they didn't just push far. They almost pushed him onto his deathbed. It also doesn't help how irrational Plankton is at first, considering he must have seen Pearl or at least know about her from before. He's also afraid of being eaten by Pearl when many times he's been eaten and he seems to come out just fine. I love how they make Plankton being eaten so serious when in other episodes it was portrayed in a cartoonish, joking sort of manner. But somewhere down the line, this series as a whole forgot what it is. It is a cartoon. This isn't Showtime. You don't have to take the things to this level to be edgy. Part of me wants to know how an idea like this goes through, because in my honest opinion, I don't think the idea of the episode was supposed to be this dark when pitched. I personally believe that somewhere down the line a lot of little things were added, such as the idea of Plankton visualizing his body being digested as well as him trying to get ran over, and somehow the episode became this. I will take the liberty of devouring this episode and regurgitating a better mess than this. This one was the hardest for me to write, however I do have an idea. Let the episode play out like it originally did. In this case, Plankton would meet Pearl and think nothing of it. She would say that she doesn't eat Plankton, so Krabs would get the idea of using his daughter to get Plankton back. Throughout the episode, Pearl, the real Pearl, would be shown to terrorize Plankton. However, why? That is what makes this episode. The first time, Mr. Krabs would pay off Pearl, telling her what to do. Pearl would play a role for the allowance, however, she wouldn't do a good job at it. Plankton wouldn't buy it and cause Pearl to leave, so Mr. Krabs would ask Pearl what happened. She'd explain that Plankton is not afraid of her, so Mr. Krabs would come up with a plan not telling Pearl. While alone, he would come up with a story that would get Pearl angry. Krabs forges Plankton's signature and writes a very rude and disrespectful letter towards Pearl, but disguised as Plankton's doing. In this process, Pearl would get upset and tell her father, the true evil person behind it, Mr. Krabs. Krabs would explain to Pearl that she needs to face Plankton head on, so as Plankton would come back to steal the formula again, Pearl would get very angry, nearly primal, and scare Plankton away. During this process, Pearl would spend more time scaring Plankton anytime she would get. Every time Pearl would lash out at Plankton, it would never be physical. Mr. Krabs would laugh, enjoying all of the torment that Plankton is getting. It would get so bad that Plankton would skip on trying to steal the formula, going to the park. He'd sit on the bench very anxious and afraid. He'd see Pearl coming along, and this time, it would be the big chase. Pearl would corner Plankton in a back alley or somewhere. During this time, Pearl would explain to Plankton what he did, even going as far as to show him the letter that, remember, he wrote. Plankton would convince Pearl that he did not write the letter because that is not his handwriting. He would later prove that. Pearl would see how he writes and put two and two together. Mr. Krabs manipulated Pearl into attacking Plankton so that he did not have to worry about him stealing the formula. So this is where those mimes at the end of the original episode would come into play. During a day out, Plankton would make glasses that would turn everyone he sees into mimes. Pearl would then give them to her father, claiming that he couldn't see as well. When Krabs puts it on, boom, everyone is mimes. Krabs would get his just desserts, no pun intended, and Pearl and Plankton would walk away, very satisfied in what they have done.
I'll catch you, Spongebob!
Number 2. Smooth Jazz, and Bikini Bottom. It may seem surprising why this is in my top 3, but this episode does a lot of little things wrong. Squidward, yet again, is not allowed to have fun. Plus, they force a lot of moments. Yes, Squidward just so happened to push his hand in the direction of Patrick's mouth. Oh, what a crap storm you've just built up. So according to an episode later down the line, Patrick doesn't have any money. In fact, Pat No Pay was built around the idea that Patrick is always broke. There's also the episode where Patrick took a vacation, but Patrick was broke. But he just so happened to get a Krabby Patty in this episode. Even if you hand wave this by having SpongeBob buy it, they had this action happen off screen so we couldn't see exactly how Patrick did it. It's not that I don't believe that he wouldn't do it, it is just that they have this sloppy excuse and this poor execution and they expect this to be funny. Maybe it is to someone, but to me, it's the same thing that I don't like in other episodes. I wonder why people hate this in Johnny Test, for example, but they can make an excuse for this series. But the main reason why this is on my top 3 is because of this moment here.
Don't, Patrick. You stay away from my backstage.
Take my backstage pass.
Tommy, want more?
In all honesty, am I just looking at this the wrong way or something? Why is it that Patrick is just hungry in this episode? In bad episodes, he just has one trait. Stupid, malicious, aware. It's always one. My whole point is, Squidward doesn't deserve this torment. This episode had an easy fix that they didn't use in this episode without my input. So to add insult to injury, let's jazz up, torture Jazz, and Bikini Bottom. This episode is gonna have a very simple fix. The episode would start out with Squidward forgetting to get his tickets. He would be at the Krusty Krabs listening to Kelpie G on closing hours when not many customers are in the restaurant. The radio would announce that tickets are available as well as backstage passes, and just like in the episode, no matter how hard Squidward tries, SpongeBob gets the tickets first. He also does plan to take Squidward along with him. Squidward would warn him that Jazz is cool and SpongeBob is not. SpongeBob would be acting like himself while Squidward would be faking cool just to fit in with the Jazz enthusiasts. When they get on the bus, everything SpongeBob says, whether it being crazy or inappropriately funny on a silent and calm ride, Squidward would openly scold him. However, the people on the bus fully accept him and his personality, being very open-minded. Squidward would sink back in pretending to accept. When they get to the arena, Squidward would try everything he can to distance himself from the sponge. However, in the process, from a distance, he looked like he'd be embarrassing himself, but when Squidward would get closer, the sponge would just appear to be expressing himself, much to whoever he's talking to's approval. During the concert, SpongeBob would take out his ukulele and jam out with Kelpie G. Squidward again would act very uptight. SpongeBob would go as far as to criticize Kelpie G's music, openly calling him out for insulting Kelpie G's genius, which would actually get Squidward called out for being so uptight. They would explain that Kelpie G's music represents a free mind open to any possibility as long as it's positive and creates thought. SpongeBob would then perform with Kelpie G. When Squidward tries with his clarinet, cutting off SpongeBob and Kelpie G quite rudely off, the crowd would not like the noise, booing and preferring Kelpie G and the sponge. He'd sink back in his chair, realizing how it feels to be judged harshly. He would walk back home, realizing that his concert experience is ruined. Kelpie would explain that everyone rides their own waves, and we should all appreciate that. This episode would end on a joke that SpongeBob received a record deal, but Squidward would deny it. Then a jump cuts to SpongeBob's house, seeing that he received a lot of money, being a reference to another particular episode.
Oops.
Number 1. Yours, mine, and mine. Oh, you want to know why I don't like this episode? Well, the background fish seems so rushed in the first few scenes. I mean, this fish in the back better handcuff his lips to his face or else they'll fly away. You actually thought that was the reason why I didn't like this? Of course, it's Patrick. SpongeBob is totally in the right for all of Patrick's rude actions. For some reason, Patrick is painfully aware of how much he can get away with because his reputation is being an idiot. I don't like Patrick at all in this episode. If I were to stop watching this particular series, episodes like this would be why. I'm not the reviewer to pull this card, but if any kid got their mannerisms from episodes like this, that just makes me dislike this episode even more. These are the type of action slimy kids that grow up into shady teenagers that grow up into crappy adults have. Can someone explain the joke of SpongeBob paying for everything and not getting any of it? As a human being who appreciates and values, everyday objects, I'm sure I would hate if someone was being this much of a douchebag. I do not think in any sense of the manner that SpongeBob went overboard or stooped down to his level. Watching this episode over 5 times in the past week, SpongeBob went from letting Patrick have the toy to axing him calmly, and then when Patrick did not give what SpongeBob rightfully earned, he bartered and got duped by the pink abomination. Think about it. Who is SpongeBob gonna call? The police? Unless Patrick litters or Mrs. Puff is in the scene, they don't care. I don't believe that SpongeBob is getting aggressive. I don't believe that SpongeBob getting aggressive is stooping down to Patrick's level, because it was clearly malicious in this episode. And that is why this, in my opinion, is the worst episode in the entire series. I cannot look at it and think for a second that anything that Patrick did was right, and that the episode had thought put into it. Even if I were to take the Patrick part out, which is 90%, you have jokes that run on like Family Guy, a Sandy filler gag, and Gary cursing under his breath. So what do we have in this children's show? Malicious intentions, cursing, fighting, suffocation, manipulation. What was Patrick's reasoning for all of this? What is his mentality? I feel as though Patrick only did it because he doesn't respect SpongeBob. Wasn't it confirmed that he doesn't know anything about him? He also learns nothing in the end, and Mr. Krabs is on top for doing absolutely nothing to solve this issue. I'm not sure if I want to rewrite this, to be honest with you, but I already made a promise, so why not? Let me see if I can rewrite this excuse for a cartoon episode. Let me state again, if I had the opportunity to rewrite this, I wouldn't. I would scrap it. This plot of SpongeBob and Patrick fighting over a toy in this childish way is just not worth being an episode. However, that was not the case when I wrote this. So let us have Mr. Krabs release a line of toys, each coming randomly in a Krabby Kids meal. Let it be anywhere from 7 to 10 to even 50 different toy combinations. SpongeBob and Patrick would spend the entire episode trying to collect all of them. However, this is what changes. SpongeBob would get a toy and have a lot of fun with it. Patrick would come along and think SpongeBob playing with the toy is a very childish and silly way to spend his day. Little does he know, when SpongeBob gives him a spare toy to play with, Patrick falls in love. I didn't think about that. I think I should reword that. When Patrick plays with the toy, he realizes how amazing it is and wants to play with it and collect them all. At first, they each get a Krabby Kids meal, and it seems that they're handling the toy craze very controlled and mature. Squidward would even openly reject the toy line, thinking it's another cheap way for Krabs to earn a quick buck. This open objection of the toy would come back later. However, as time rolls on, they order too much and get sick from eating a Krabby Kids meal, even having Mr. Krabs not serve them, not only because of his morals, but because customers being sick over his product is not good for business. They end up trying disguises, as well as SpongeBob trying to sneak in some toys during his shift. However, Krabs or Squidward would always stop them. Throughout the process, SpongeBob and Patrick would decide to work together to get the toys. Thus, SpongeBob and Patrick deciding to work together to get the toys. At night, the duo sneaks into the Krusty Krab. Opening the vault that the toys are hidden in, they grab as many as they can, counting their individual collections, and plot twists, they are both one short. So they both fight over it, having a great climax, trying to take the toy and run. This would show how immature and childish they are. SpongeBob would already have sunk down to Patrick's level, as they are both fighting over a toy. In the process, the toy is squished and destroyed. This causes the duo to fight for real, whether it be pure verbal or even a bit of combat. During all of this, Krabs would come back and see them acting this way. He would scold them for breaking in and explain that a toy shouldn't tear their friendship apart. In this version, Krabs would make one for both, having both of them apologize afterward. Then you can end on a joke of Squidward collecting them all, having completed the collection, only for some magical force to come and break and destroy each of them, rendering them all worthless. This was a big project, and it was just after I did a big project, the 25th special. Looking back on what I'm going to be doing later on, I think this is probably the last thing that I'm going to be doing in terms of such a grand project. I'm going to take it easy. Pick on some easy targets, you know? Don't get me wrong, I love doing this for you guys, but this required an all-nighter to get complete. The only thing I can see coming out that's going to be big is the season review, but that's not going to be out for a while, and I am working little by little on it. So let me know what you think. What was your favorite episode that I've rewritten? Which one didn't you like? I'm open to criticism, and that's the reason why I created the How I'd Write series. This review is getting pretty long, and next week I have a surprise for you all. So as always, I hope your time is well spent, and Alpha out.